Hello, and thanks for listening today. Today I'd like to tell you about FDA's efforts to facilitate the development of safe and effective regenerative medicine products. By way of disclosure, I'm a full-time employee of the United States government and have no relevant financial relationships with commercial interests to disclose. So just to tell you the bottom line up front, FDA is committed to advancing the development of safe and effective cellular therapies to help address unmet medical needs. We're doing this by encouraging sponsor interactions with the agency, deploying all of the applicable development pathways that we have at the agency, and by taking appropriate action when needed to protect public health. And just to back up, cellular therapies today are quite a diverse array of products, and they range from relatively simpler products, some even simpler than the ones shown here, such as just simple skin grafts and the like, to stem cells, to things like bioengineered skin, bioengineered blood vessels. We now have organs, simple organs like bioengineered bladders that are being studied. And we have some very complex cellular therapies, genetically modified cells such as the chimeric antigen receptor T cells. The regulatory framework for cellular therapies is based on this concept of being regulated as human cells, tissues, or cellular or tissue-based products, or for short, HCTPs. And these are articles containing or consisting of human cells or tissues that are intended for implantation, transplantation, infusion, or transfer into a human recipient. That's defined in the Code of Federal Regulations, and the site is provided here, 1271.3d. Examples include skin, cornea, and cellular-derived therapeutic products such as mesenchymal stem cells or stromal cells, fibroblasts, pancreatic islets. Now to take just a step even back further. So what's our regulatory framework for biologics in general? Well, our regulation actually the authority here stems from the Constitution, from the Commerce Clause. And then Congress passes laws and statutes which in broad strokes tell us how to regulate these products. The applicable laws are the Public Health Service Act, and Section 351 is a descendant of the original Biologics Control Act of 1902, which gives the authority for the agency to license and to inspect for biologic products. Section 361 came a little bit later and has to do with prevention of communicable diseases. And then we have the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And there's actually a harmonization between the two acts as we regulate biologics. But those laws are relatively high level, and to really get into more detail about how we do things, we use notice and comment rulemaking, and so we have regulations that govern these, and they have a much greater level of granularity. But even those don't necessarily always tell people how to go about making sure their products are consistent with the regulations. And so we issue guidance, which is also done by notice and comment, but guidance is more of recommendations as opposed to the rules. The rules are musts, or regulations are musts. Guidance is should. Or may. And so, as I've noted, Section 351 of the Public Health Service Act notes things like the fact that you need to have a license intended to distribute a product in interstate commerce. The products that are licensed have to be safe, pure, and potent. And that act gives us suspension and revocation power over licenses and recall authority. Section 361 of the Public Health Service Act allows us at FDA to issue and enforce regulations necessary to prevent the introduction, transmission, or spread of communicable diseases from foreign countries into the United States or interstate. Now, The rules for tissues, that next level of granularity down, are located at 21 CFR 1271, and they have a history that dates back to the 1990s. At that point, a notice and comment rulemaking process was started, and that involves several steps: advance notice that we're going to make a rule, publication of the draft regulations, a comment period, and then after that, publication of the final rule, where we provide a response to all the comments that were provided. Now, the tissue rules were finalized on May 25th, 2005. And the rules basically developed two regulatory tiers for HCTPs. And this was based on the idea that some products needed to be regulated just like standard conventional biologic products that needed a license, but others for which the efficacy was really apparent on face value, and for which really it was just safety precautions that needed to be taken, could be regulated under a lower level of oversight, and in fact a much lower level of oversight. So the tier of products that has to be regulated under the Biologics License Authority, sometimes known as 351 HCTPs, has to go through the standard process of having the product studied under investigation new drug applications and then coming in and getting a license. And then if products meet, for other products that meet certain criteria, those criteria to be kicked down, these are the 361 HCTPs. These are regulated solely under the authority for preventing communication of infectious diseases, subject to our tissue regulations. And here, really, there's no pre-market review and approval required. And really what just has to be done is the appropriate precautions need to be taken per our guidance and regulations to prevent communicable disease transmission. So Section 361 HCTPs are regulated solely under Section 361 of the Public Health Service Act, and the criteria that the regulations set forth for things to be regulated under this pathway says that they have to be minimally manipulated, that is, they can't undergo significant manufacturing. They have to be intended for homologous use only, that is, they need to be used in the recipient in a same manner as from the donor. They should not be combined with another article, with some exceptions. And the fourth criteria is that either they don't have a systemic effect and are not dependent on the metabolic activity of living cells for their primary function, or if they have a systemic effect or are dependent on the metabolic activity of living cells, therefore autologous or first or second degree blood relative or reproductive use. Now, even with this level of detail of the regulations, there was a lot of concern among some that people didn't really understand what we considered needing a biologics license versus not needing a biologics license. And because this was left up to developers to interpret, there probably was some miscategorization going on. We know that. And because of that, in 2017, we developed a suite of regenerative medicine guidance documents to clarify our existing regulations and make it simpler for sponsors to determine if they needed to obtain pre-market authorization for their products. That is, a license, or if it were a device, a clearance. We also wanted to help expedite the development and approval of safe and effective innovative regenerative medicine therapies and associated devices. So the final guidance documents that became available after the drafts were published and went final after comment period include 4 documents, one on the same surgical procedure exception. That's when you can basically not even have to come in under any of these provisions, when you basically don't need to enter this regulatory pathway because the product is really being used in the same surgical procedure or equivalent. And what that would be something like taking out a bone flap and storing it and then putting it back in the same individual, or taking out parathyroids at the time of thyroidectomy and storing them until they're reimplanted. Then there's the regulatory considerations for human cell tissues and cellular and tissue-based products, minimum manipulation and homologous use guidance. I'm going to tell you more about that. A device guidance on how we would apply least burdensome to regenerative medicine devices, and a guidance on how we would apply expedited programs for regenerative medicine therapies for serious conditions, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So the guidance on minimum manipulation and homologous use clarifies that minimum manipulation and homologous use are distinct concepts. It notes that adipose is considered to be a structural tissue for the purpose of applying the regulatory framework. I know that some people think it's an endocrine tissue. It probably does have some endocrine function, we know that, but for our purposes, it's really defined as a structural tissue. We talked about in this guidance how to determine if an HCTP is minimally manipulated, and we gave examples of different types of processing for a wide range of HCTPs. We clarified what was meant by key terms in the homologous use definition, and we talked about how to determine if an HCTP was intended for homologous use, and we gave a variety of examples. We also noted something that clarified that adipose tissue for breast reconstruction or augmentation could be considered homologous use. Another important part of this guidance was we knew that people had sometimes accidentally ended up perhaps in the wrong category and needed time to correct that. And because of that, we put a period of enforcement discretion, which was originally 3 years, into the guidance, where people could come in if they should have been under an IND BLA pathway, the 351 pathway, and get an IND and or a license. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we decided to lengthen that period of time, given the challenges that became apparent over the past year. And so we now have this period of enforcement discretion for enforcing these regulations that will continue until May 31st, 2021. And that enforcement discretion continues to be based on a determination of risk to public health. Obviously, if something is putting public health at risk, we're going to take enforcement action sooner. But for products that we consider to be at low risk of harming public health, we'll continue our enforcement discretion policy. Now, on the other end, we have the expedited programs for regenerative medicine therapies, which describes FDA's considerations for how regenerative medicine therapy advanced designation can be applied to product development and review. It also describes some development pathways, which I'll tell you about. The Regenerative Medicine Advanced Therapy designation applies to certain cell therapies, therapeutic tissue engineering products, human cell and tissue products, and combination products. And it also applies to genetically modified cell therapies and gene therapies producing durable effects. For a product to get Regenerative Medicine Advanced Therapy designation, it has to be intended for serious or life-threatening diseases or conditions. There has to be preliminary clinical evidence that it can address unmet medical needs. Once we get an application, we respond to that designation request within 60 days, and designated products are eligible as appropriate for priority review and accelerated approval. That is, they can have kind of the breakthrough designation like programs applied. And in many ways, a Regenerative Medicine Advanced Therapy designation is breakthrough therapy designation applied with a slightly lower standard to be able to get the designation. That is, the breakthrough therapy designation standard is one has to be better than an existing standard of care, whereas for RMAT designation, one simply has to have clinical evidence that it has the potential to address unmet medical need. But it's really tailored for cellular therapy products. And that includes the fact that Congress, when they passed this provision, expanded the way sponsors could fulfill accelerated approval provisions by not just coming along with a study that looked at a different endpoint at the end of the study, but by having additional ways of fulfilling accelerated approval commitments, including using clinical evidence, clinical studies, patient registry data, or other sources of real-world evidence, collecting larger confirmatory data sets, or post-approval monitoring of patients treated with the therapy. So just looking over a longer period of time at those treated. Another thing that we talked about in the guidance on regenerative medicine therapies was trying to think about how people could apply innovative development programs to regenerative medicine products. And we know that in many cases, these products are used, they're generated and used at academic sites, but each individual site might not have enough patients to be able to study enough patients to get a biologics license. And for that reason, we put forth the suggestion of a collaborative development plan. And just to remind everyone, kind of traditional development of a biologic product, or for that matter, a drug, is that you have a single sponsor that manufactures a product, usually in a single facility. They then distribute that product to various clinical sites that are doing a clinical trial, a multi-center clinical trial. Those data are then collected. The sponsor submits them, and they get an approval to market a product that they manufacture from their single facility, or sometimes more than one facility. But in the regenerative medicine space, we have multiple places that might be manufacturing a relatively simple product. They may well want to study that product at their own sites. And one idea here is if one can have multiple sites making a product according to a standard procedure and using some type of control to make sure they're making essentially the same product at the different sites, they could study that product at their own sites according to a common clinical trial protocol, and then use that collected data to get a license at their site at each of their individual sites. So they basically draw on the collected data. And that way, after they have a license, if they want to go off and evolve the product in a different way from their colleagues, they can do so. One thing that's important about this pathway that I'm describing is that before one gets started down this road, one needs to make sure that one has attorneys who make sure that all the intellectual property issues are addressed. Now, I just want to finish up by providing you with some information on how you can get help from the agency if you have questions about whether a product should be regulated under a license pathway, or whether it might be kicked down and not need to come in for the IND licensure pathway. And one of those is kind of an informal program we have called the Tissue Reference Group Rapid Inquiry Program. This allows one who's making an HCTP to get a rapid, preliminary, and informal and non-binding assessment of how your products are regulated. Basically, it can be done by email, doesn't require a lot of documentation. We do need to understand what product's being made and how it's being used. And their link here describes what information and who to contact. But we usually turn these around within a few days to a week and provide you with information about whether it's a conventional biologic product regulated as a 351 biologic product, or whether it's a product that can be regulated under the tissue rules under Section 361. And we've now extended this program through March 31st of 2021. For those who know they have a biologic product that's going to require an IND and licensure, we have another program called the Interact program, which allows sponsors to come in to have an informal regulatory interaction around questions they might have about the preclinical manufacturing or clinical development of their product. And the Interact program really also is not meant to be very burdensome. It's meant to allow one to have a couple-page description of a product and what's being done with the product, and to have a few questions that we can ask, that they can ask and we can answer as part of a meeting. Sometimes we'll answer these in writing. Sometimes we'll have a meeting, now mostly virtual. There's a link here, but if you search up Interact and CBER, you will come to our webpage, which describes the standard operating procedure for how to submit these requests. So just to summarize, FDA is committed to advancing the development of safe and effective cellular therapies to help address unmet medical needs, and will accomplish that by encouraging sponsor interactions with the agency, deploying all applicable development pathways, and when necessary, taking appropriate action to protect public health. Thanks very much for listening.